Hello and welcome. I'm Goharaza and you are watching Eureka, a program that brings you face to face with the real heroes, those who have made a difference to mankind. When Darwin said that we have evolved from various species over a long period of time, it shook the world. The most beautiful and most important thing that happened during this evolution was evolution of brain. The matter, generally called as grey matter, evolved over a long period of time. In the history of mankind, when from Homo habilis we got converted into Homo erectus, the brain size suddenly increased. It's the most complex structure that has been created by nature, most delicate, most beautiful form of matter. But what do we know about this? Are there questions that are unanswered? Are there questions we have already answered? For this discussion, we have a special guest today, Dr. Subrata Sinha. Welcome to Eureka, Doctor.
Thank you.
Before I get into the science and the very complex science that you have been doing, let's go back to memory lanes.
Okay.
You have said that your childhood was uneventful. I found it the most eventful childhood. Your father was a freedom fighter. Your mother was a teacher. The house that you grew in was visited by the most wonderful people, the best of the brains in the country, and that shaped your life. So why do you feel that it was uneventful?
Well, I mean, the way it was not uneventful. It was, I would say, a happy childhood, and in the sense there was a thing.
There were no miseries.
Exactly, that is the thing. Hardships and all. I really didn't feel any hardships. We didn't have too much money. But I didn't feel the need for money the way we used to live. So, we used to study, play, talk, think, read, like any other children. And unlike today, we used to value, sports, play, interactions, and obviously there was no computer, so there were more friends which you could.
Majority of children do not get that kind of exposure which you got. Right from the beginning, you grew up on the stories of your father's involvement in freedom movement. So the values shaped probably your attitude towards life during that period. Is it correct?
It is absolutely correct. And as I grow older and the more I think about it, things that were taken for granted and which had sort of steeped into my consciousness were those values of both, let us say, sincerity, austerity, truthfulness, intellectual development, the ability to discuss things, the ability to be tolerant, the ability to grasp new things and to have an intellectual curiosity for things beyond what would be my routine experience. I mean, these are things which I value a lot. And they somehow steeped into my subconscious, or they diffused into my skin, so whatever way you call it. But it was kind of taken for granted. And now I realize how fortunate I was.
And you were a very inquisitive child. You were very hardworking. You were a very good student. And you kept asking questions all the time. What was the attitude of elders? Did they ever told you, now shut up, don't ask questions?
Actually, compared to my generation, so to say, they used to enjoy and encourage arguments. Sometimes as a child you obviously go beyond, over the top. But I never felt a kind of that you should not talk this to your parents, or you should not ask them why and what and So we had an extraordinarily open and frank atmosphere at home. And
You were also exposed to literature. You were also exposed to poetry, especially by your grandfather and father.
Also my
and
mother, actually. My mother was, in the 40s, she was an MA in English from Lucknow University at a time when there was only 20 girls in the whole university. And her experience of that time was also quite remarkable. So everybody actually.
Breaking the traditions and going beyond the boundaries of traditions was imbibed by you during your childhood from parents, as well as probably the other people who visited your house.
With many of them, especially especially related to science. Now I realize that as a role model of an academic medical scientist, which is very rare, but one of our family friends, Professor Bhargav of Lucknow University, I sort of grew up with him visiting us and talking to us. And I remember my mother telling me, now he had already done his medicine and he is now going to USA to do a PhD. Now that is something, when we are talking of 60s, it is rare today. It was rarer then.
Correct.
And another of my friends...
and that is how he became probably your
now
role model for you.
A kind of a role model which I looked back and I really discovered that where did I get this idea of going into academic medicine? And possibly from him and possibly from another of my mother's friends, who was a lady who moved from from physics to biology, Dr. Chatterjee, again from...
That was a major somersault during those days.
Exactly.
People didn't change very easily.
So those were the things which are revolutionary today. And retrospectively, they would have been extraordinarily revolutionary during the 60s, 60s.
And
not
such
even
people
70s.
Made a major imprint on your memory.
Exactly, because looking back, when you are a child, it just flows. You don't know what is what. But looking back, definitely that made a difference.
Dr. Sinha, you decided to go and join medical. You could have been a historian. You could have joined the stream of literature which you were interested in. You happen to be a poet and you published your book. What clinched the issue that science is going to be your destiny?
It's difficult to tell. It is extremely difficult to tell because we also were exposed to a lot of poetry and literature from my grandfather, my father, and my mother, and some of our friends. And they encouraged me to write. And I, even as a school child, I used to try to write little poems and send them off to all these magazines which would have it, and most of them were rejected, but a few were published.
That's very honest of you.
And then I managed also to write up a little book of poetry from what at that time was quite a famous place, Writers' Workshop in Calcutta, which was run by P. Lal. But on the other hand, I was also continuously interested in science, and I used to read a lot about science in general.
Did you find these two seemingly placed apart endeavors of human being as creative as each other?
Actually, I find them equally creative, and I don't, we talk, there was this famous thing about C.P. Snow's two cultures.
Correct.
I don't think there are two cultures. There is an indivisibility of human mind, human consciousness, and human experience. And the cultures are not distinct. They are all our ways of living and understanding and interacting with the universe. So, okay, in one there is...
poetry is as good as science.
It is
as creative.
It is very creative.
And it is one way of interacting with...
It is one way of understanding the world and giving your views. Equally, science is another way. Okay, the methods of both are different. Science is essentially the heart of science is measurement. But the point is, from measurement, what do? You go into hypothesis, creativity, and understanding. So at a time, there comes a point of time where I feel that the whole process is quite the same, actually.
Very interesting. But what clinched the issue? Why did you choose eventually?
Why did I choose science, and why did I eventually
Science as the
science, medicine? Okay, I think a strong thing has to do. Going back, I think, to people we interact with, and the fact is that
Was it teachers also?
yes, we had very good school teachers at school, but the point is that the people who taught us English were as good, and the people who taught us history was as good also. So I really, we had good teachers of biology and physics, and we equally had good teachers of history and English. So how does one get more inclined to one than the other? It's very difficult to parse out in that sense.
So you come to Rajans College.
Hansraj College, that was just for my first year.
For pre-medical.
Pre-medical.
And you prepared, and then you appeared for the exam and got selected in one of the most prestigious institute of the country. Were you excited at that time? Or was it in vain that, yeah, I got selected, so I got selected?
No. I was very much excited at that time. And I also had a science talent scholarship, so I could have continued my zoology honors, or I could have continued in medicine. And then this is a casual conversation. I don't think my father even remembers it. But he said, what do you want to do? So he says, I want to do research on what? He said, ultimately, I want to cure human disease. Like every child does, we all have dreams of making a dent or a mark on the world. And then he says that, look, if you want to cure human disease, you might as well understand the human body and the human system, and with the best place to actually teach you the human system is a medical school. And at that time, AIIMS used to have, or even now it has, let me say, but what excited me then was that we used to again read about, I still remember the World Congress of Physiology was going on, and AIMS at that time, this anti-fertility vaccine was very much discussed, and there were other departments that I came to know of, because the institution was located physically quite close to my house where I grew up, that even in brain research or in human disease, there was a lot. And then there is a lot in the medical curriculum which actually is science-based. The first 1.5 years at that time, now the first year, they teach you anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, which is very science-based, which is very hardcore science. I mean, we in 1975, we were talking of, there was a question in my final exam on recombinant DNAs. So it is, so you do get a lot of exposure.
Dr. Sinha, we were talking about the institution building in the country, but let me come back to your institution, which is Brain Research Center.
National Brain
Research Center. It's a national facility that's been created. Why should we support as a nation very expensive research, and that too in the area which is very, very complex? What kind of knowledge you're generating there, and what is it that you're giving back to the country?
The National Brain Research Center, which has been created by the Department of Biotechnology, and I must mention Professor P. N. Tandon, who was the chief of Sciences Center at AIIMS, who is, whose brainchild it is. Now, it is an institution which is dedicated to neuroscience, and by neuroscience, it has a very broad view of neuroscience. At one end, we seek to study the complexity of brain circuitry and how the processes which go into behavior and some extent thinking. And in that sense, We study everything from a very simple worm, Cynorhabditis elegans, in which every single neuron has been mapped. So it provides a kind of what we could call as a reductionist model of many of the core processes of the brain that are continued through evolution. And at the other end, of course, we go from flies to rodents to even human beings. And we have an integrated brain mapping and brain imaging complex which goes into these areas where we look at both human disease as well as human, let us say, how the various circuits of the human brain work and function
and interact.
So let me start from the most obvious ones. The most obvious ones is what is directly translatable into let us say human benefit. One of the interesting projects that we have is on brain infections, and based on that brain infection or work on Japanese encephalitis, one drug called minocycline, which is an antibiotic, it has been found that it functions, these are molecules which have multiple functions, and it actually functions to suppress inflammation in the brain. And that has, based on our research, King George's Medical College has undertaken a clinical trial, Dr. Rashmi Kumar and this Dr. Basu from NBRC is work, and there is a clinical trial on acute encephalitis syndrome where it is, and soon hopefully it will be published, and then we can go to public about what are the benefits. So this is a direct benefit. The other, continuing on this theme of direct benefits, there are these, we have a very good magnetic resonance spectroscopy and imaging place setup, where we have people, Dr. Mandal, he has identified metabolites in the brain which can be used to see progression to, let us say, Alzheimer's disease, which is something that with our population aging is something that we really need to look at. And maybe with this kind of integrated metabolic mapping we will be able to achieve a kind of, let us say, even apart from diagnostics, therapeutic strategies. Similarly, learning disabilities are a major issue
in the
country.
Correct.
And there is a lot of study on how
does it have to do with brain or maybe malnutrition in the country?
Okay, we have also projects on how malnutrition affects the brain, but learning disabilities have a lot to do with the brain, even if you remove malnutrition from the ambit, though definitely malnutrition has a role. And there we are, again, we are trying to.
So even if today we overcome the problem of malnutrition in the country, for a very long time your institute would be required to treat a large number of children who have been malnutrition today.
See, let's put it like that. That is absolutely true, because it is known that malnutrition affects the brain even across generations. So we are starting a neurodevelopmental science initiative where we are trying to focus on the role of malnutrition in the brain. But the fact is, coming back, learning disabilities even are there in developed countries which have no problem of malnutrition.
Correct.
Dyslexia, autism, and these are
these will keep on haunting you.
These keep haunting us, and we need first a diagnosis,
right,
at the teacher level, at the community level, and then a solution. So diagnosis and remediation is important for these neurodevelopmental disorders. Stroke, for example, is another thing which will keep haunting us, and as we grow older and older, we are, Dr. Roy is trying to develop a way of, assessing how the brain elasticity is altered in stroke.
So, without unpacking this black box called brain, which is probably the most delicate form of matter that nature has created, you cannot overcome a very large number of problems that society faces. And therefore, an institution of this magnitude would be required, and probably you'll argue that many more institutions of such kind would be required in the country.
See, definitely. And let me also add one aspect to it. These are the ones which are highly applied. Now, the point is we have somebody who is looking at a worm to see how a nerve will regenerate. We are looking, and we have Dr. Jain who is looking at how the brain rearranges in form, in response to, say, injury of the nervous system. So those are issues which are done on model organisms and animals and worms, but they have a direct relationship to human existence at the cellular level, at the molecular level, how the brain circuitry forms. So there is a huge, let us say, initiative on looking at brain circuitry.
And you would also say that the kind of research that's being done on brain in India, neurosciences, is as good as being done anywhere in the world?
Yes, we have a few institutions where I can confidently say that the kind quality of neuroscience done is equal to anywhere in the world. My only thing is that instead of few, there should be a lot more, because ultimately we also, in order to influence science, a critical mass of numbers of both scientists and institutions which are located in our nation is very critical.
Will you also agree with me if I say that the whole development of humankind, the development of civilization, the development of countries is ultimately related to the brain and thought processes, and therefore the sciences called neurosciences are extremely important for any country to perform and excel in?
I would say that there is no doubt. I mean, even a very casual understanding of the evolution of human civilization will say that it is thinking and the brain which has catalyzed this whole process and brought it almost into a logarithmic level of progression. Exponential growth. And therefore, and see, as society becomes more complex and we live longer and longer, the problems related to the brain are going to be more and more, because and in India, we have this, what is often known as the demographic double trap, that we haven't come across, fully overcome the diseases, the problems of malnutrition, infection, and poor health care, which affect a large percent of the population. And on the other hand, we have a progressive number of people living longer and longer, where degenerative diseases coming, and they affect the brain. So purely from a utilitarian point of view, it is more and more important that we find answers to that. Apart from the more fundamental areas of how the brain works. But the point is, I don't see any distinction between the fundamental areas and the applied areas, because when you do applied research, you can actually make very many fundamental discoveries, and when you do fundamental research, you can actually, many of them are translatable.
Have you experienced moments of Eureka in life in this whole journey? When did you say, yes, I've done it?
See, at different stages, they are also often related to scientific discovery. As a student, I used to work on oncogenes, and then I used to work at that time with my PhD in UK. It was on rat liver tumors, and then we found that there was an oncogene that was activated. So that was my kind of first Eureka.
Would you like to give a message to the younger generation based on your experience, and what should India do and what should the next generation be doing?
Our science needs to be developed at a speed which matches the way science is moving anywhere in the world, and therefore a focus on science is a very important investment for the future. So it makes sense both from personal happiness as well as what I understand of economics as an economic investment.
Science is fun, ever changing, ever exciting fun. That is the message we carry back home today. We'll come back next week with a fascinating personality who has made a difference to the world of science. If you have any question or query or comment, please do write to us on Eureka, rstv@gmail.com. Till then,